Karen slowed, taking a deep breath, then made a decision. "What are you selling?" she asked as she approached. The children looked up nervously, clearly expecting ejection from her property. The oldest girl swallowed hard and answered, "Lemonade and cookies. It's for the animal shelter. They need supplies." Karen studied the hastily made sign, the slightly crooked table, the pitcher of lemonade that was mostly ice. A younger Karen would have seen disorder and rule-breaking. Now she saw something else. "Your sign is hard to read from the street," she said finally. "Would you like me to help you make a bigger one? And perhaps you could move to the edge of the driveway when more people will see you." The children exchanged confused glances, then cautious smiles broke out. Later, as she sat in a lawn chair beside their revamped stand, now with a professional-looking sign, proper shade, and an expanded menu featuring her own contribution of iced tea, Karen caught Richard walking by. He did a comical double-take at the scene, then grinned and approached. "Never thought I'd see the day," he said, purchasing a cookie and lemonade. "Neither did I," Karen admitted. "But I've been thinking about what makes a neighborhood valuable. It's not just about property assessments." Richard nodded, taking a seat on the grass nearby. "You know, I always thought you actually cared about Pinecrest, even when I couldn't stand your methods." Karen considered this. I do. I just couldn't see that I was protecting the shell of a community while hollowing out its heart." As the afternoon warmed, more neighbors stopped by, many doing the same double-take Richard had upon seeing Karen hosting a lemonade stand. Each small interaction, a joke, a compliment on her garden plans, an invitation to dinner, was another tiny repair to the community fabric she'd once torn with her rigid enforcement. Some tensions remained. Some neighbors still crossed the street when they saw her coming. Trust, unlike HOA violations, couldn't be resolved with a simple form. But as Karen watched the neighborhood children count their earnings for the animal shelter, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Genuine pride in her community, not for its property values, but for its heart. And as for what came next, that remained to be seen. Diana had mentioned elections were coming up again next year. Karen had no illusions about regaining the presidency, nor did she want it. But perhaps there might be a place for her experience, tempered now with a new perspective. After all, rules still mattered, just not as much as the people they were meant to serve. The election results hit Karen like a physical blow. Diana Jackson, 87 votes. Karen Wilkinson, 12 votes. Even accounting for the neighbors she'd alienated recently, the numbers were devastating. Had she really only maintained the support of 12 households out of 99? Had the other 87 been silently resenting her all this time? In the days that followed, Karen found herself adrift. Her morning routine of property violation patrols suddenly seemed pointless. Without her clipboard and authority, she was just a middle-aged woman taking suspiciously detailed interest in other people's yards. After decades of defining herself through rules enforcement, first as a corporate compliance officer, then as HOA president following her early retirement, Karen faced an identity crisis. Worse, the neighborhood seemed to be flourishing without her oversight. Diana had formed committees that people actually volunteered for enthusiastically. The community garden project broke ground on the once empty lot, with residents donating plants, tools, and time. Even Mrs. Peterson, Karen's one reliable ally, had contributed heirloom tomato seedlings. Karen watched from her window as Richard hosted a weekend workshop, teaching neighborhood children how to build birdhouses, a project that would have triggered multiple violations under her leadership. The sounds of laughter and hammering grated on her nerves, but beneath the irritation was something more uncomfortable: loneliness. The final blow came when she received an official notice from the new board. It wasn't a violation, but something worse: an invitation to join the community building committee. The handwritten note from Diana read, "Your organizational skills and knowledge of the neighborhood would be invaluable. We might not always agree on methods, but I believe you truly care about Pinecrest. Please consider it." Karen's first instinct was to tear it up. Instead, she found herself sitting on her immaculately maintained porch, staring at the paper until the words blurred. A commotion down the street caught her attention. A moving van was pulling up to the miller's house. She watched as neighbors converged to help, forming a cheerful bucket brigade to unload boxes. Without conscious decision, Karen found herself walking toward the activity. She hovered at the edge of the group, unsure of her welcome, until Mrs. Chen spotted her. "Karen, perfect timing. We could use another pair of hands," the elderly woman called out, offering a small box labeled kitchen. Heart pounding, Karen accepted the box. As she carried it toward the house, she braced for cold shoulders or outright rejection. Instead, people simply made space for her in the line, acknowledging her with the same casual nods they gave each other. Inside, she found herself face to face with Diana, who was organizing the kitchen unloading. "Counter or cabinet?" Karen asked stiffly, holding up the box. Diana smiled. "Cabinet above the refrigerator, if you don't mind. And thank you for coming." "I haven't decided about the committee," Karen blurted. "That's fine. But you're still part of this community, committee or not," Diana replied, turning to direct another volunteer. The simple exchange left Karen unsettled. For years, she'd viewed community as something to be controlled rather than experienced. People had been chess pieces to be moved according to her rules, not neighbors with their own valid preferences and needs. As the afternoon progressed, Karen found herself drawn into conversations, awkward at first, then gradually more natural. She caught herself reflexively noting rule violations: the Martinez family's children drawing chalk art on the sidewalk, the impromptu potluck forming on folding tables that certainly hadn't been approved. But for once, she kept these observations to herself. And strangely, the neighborhood didn't descend into chaos. It simply lived. Karen Wilkinson stood frozen in the middle of Richard Miller's front yard, her pristine white tennis shoes now sinking slowly into 3 inches of thick brown mud. Her mouth hung open in a perfect O of horror as the viscous sludge crept up past her ankles, ruining her designer athleisure wear. 30 seconds ago, she'd been marching confidently across what appeared to be solid ground, clipboard in hand, ready to issue yet another HOA violation. Now, she was quite literally stuck in the consequences of her own making. "Need some help there, Karen?" Richard called cheerfully from his porch, sipping his morning coffee with undisguised glee. "I did put up caution signs, but someone removed them yesterday. Wonder who that could have been." The Pennycrest Estates Homeowners Association had never seen a president as dedicated as Karen Wilkinson. At 52, with her immaculately highlighted bob and perpetually pursed lips, Karen approached her HOA duties with the strategic intensity of a military general and the moral certainty of a medieval inquisitor. Her personal mission, to maintain property values through absolute conformity, had earned her a special kind of neighborhood infamy. It had all started 3 days earlier when Richard installed a simple side gate to access his backyard workshop more easily. The gate, though tasteful and matching his home's exterior, lacked one critical element: Karen's approval. This unauthorized gate is a direct violation of Bylaws Section 12, Paragraph 7. Karen had declared, slapping a violation notice onto Richard's door with the satisfaction of a judge delivering a death sentence. Remove it within 48 hours, or face fines of $100 per day. Richard, a civil engineer with a particular expertise in soil dynamics, had attempted reasoning. The bylaws only require approval for structural changes visible from the main road. This gate is on my side yard and isn't visible from anywhere but my own property. Karen's smile had been thin and cold. The board, meaning me, interprets the bylaws as we see fit, and I can see your gate from Mrs. Peterson's yard next door when I'm conducting inspections. The next morning, Richard discovered concrete barriers blocking his gate, heavy, ugly impediments that Karen had somehow managed to have installed overnight. When he confronted her, she merely shrugged. Safety concerns. Unauthorized gates could allow strangers into our community. What Karen hadn't counted on was that Richard's engineering background gave him specialized knowledge, particularly about how certain soil compositions, when saturated with water, could maintain the appearance of solid ground while becoming essentially a mud trap, and how this effect could be amplified in specific targeted areas, leaving surrounding areas perfectly solid. Now, as Karen struggled futilely to extract herself from the mud pit, Richard strolled down from his porch, careful to walk only on the hidden solid pathways he'd created. You know what the real violation is, Karen? Trespassing. And moving those caution signs was tampering with safety equipment, he said, holding up his phone. I've got it all on my security camera. This is assault. Karen sputtered, mud now splattered across her tennis whites. Actually, it's just physics. And karma, Richard replied calmly. Now, about those concrete barriers you illegally placed on my property. Around them, neighbors began to emerge from their homes, drawn by the commotion, and not a single one was rushing to Karen's aid. Karen had never lost an election, primarily because no one had ever dared run against her. For 6 years, she'd ruled Pinecrest Estates through a combination of procedural expertise, intimidation, and the general apathy of homeowners who couldn't be bothered to attend meetings. Now, facing her first real challenge, she was discovering that righteous indignation was not, in fact, a winning campaign strategy. Her opponent, Diana Jackson, a new resident with an irritatingly reasonable approach to community governance, had launched her campaign with a neighborhood barbecue. Karen had initially dismissed this as frivolous, until she drove past and saw virtually every household in attendance, laughing and actually enjoying each other's company. Even worse, they were discussing ideas for neighborhood improvements that completely circumvented Karen's carefully structured approval processes. We could create a community garden in that unused corner lot, Diana was suggesting as Karen lurked at the periphery. And maybe a play area for kids that's visible from multiple homes, so parents can take turns supervising. That lot is designated for future parking expansion, Karen interjected loudly, startling the group. It's been in the 5-year plan since 2019. An awkward silence fell. Diana recovered first, offering Karen a plate of food with a genuine smile. Karen, I'm glad you came. We were just brainstorming. The 5-year plan can always be revised if residents want something different, right? The reasonable tone was infuriating. Karen ignored the offered plate. Plans exist for a reason. You can't just change community structures because of momentary whims. Actually, that's exactly what community governance is supposed to do. Respond to the changing needs and desires of its members, Diana replied, still irritatingly pleasant. Anyway, please stay and eat. We'd love your input. Karen retreated, unsettled by the encounter. Back home, she began crafting campaign materials emphasizing her experience and commitment to property values. She printed flyers covered with before and after photos of violations she'd corrected, neighborhood valuation charts, and stern reminders about the consequences of lax enforcement. The next day, she discovered Diana's simple campaign signs had appeared in several yards. Build community, not just rules. The contrast to Karen's own materials, essentially threats disguised as information, was stark. Karen decided direct action was needed. She began going door to door, reminding residents of her contributions. But where she had expected grateful acknowledgement, she found strained politeness at best, and at worst, doors closing in her face. At the Hendersons' house, she was particularly bewildered. But I've protected your property values, she insisted as Mr. Henderson prepared to close the door. I made the Rodriguezes repaint their door when they chose that outrageous blue. I stopped the Williams children from setting up that unsightly lemonade stand. Mr. Henderson paused. Karen, my daughter was friends with the Williams kids. That lemonade stand was raising money for her cancer treatment fund. Well, it still violated Section 3 regarding commercial activities, Karen replied, feeling somehow that she was losing ground, despite being factually correct. You know what? I'd rather lose 5% property value than live in a neighborhood where kids can have lemonade stands for a good cause, he said quietly, and closed the door. That night, checking the online neighborhood forum, Karen discovered a new post going viral, a spreadsheet created by Richard, showing the money homeowners had spent complying with Karen's numerous violation notices over the past year. The total was staggering, especially compared to the minimal impact many of the violations would have had on property values. For the first time, Karen felt a flutter of real fear, not just about losing the election, but about something deeper, the realization that she had become someone people actively avoided. Had she gone too far? Was there any way to recover from this? 3 months after the election that ended her reign, Karen found herself doing something that would have been unthinkable before, applying for a permit from the very HOA board she once dominated. The rain garden she wanted to install, designed with water-permeable surfaces that prevented runoff while supporting native plants, technically required architectural review. "Looks great to me," Richard said, reviewing her meticulously drawn plans. As the new head of the architectural committee, he had the authority she once wielded, but his approach couldn't have been more different. "This will actually help with that drainage issue on the north corner of your property." "Yes, that's why Karen stopped herself from launching into the detailed explanation she'd prepared, complete with citations to environmental benefits and property value enhancements. Old habits died hard. "Thank you." As she walked home with her approved permit, Karen reflected on the strange journey of the past months. The community building committee she'd reluctantly joined had become, surprisingly, a source of satisfaction. Her organizational skills, once channeled into finding violations, now helped coordinate neighborhood events and improvement projects. People still approached her cautiously, but the open hostility had faded. Her rain garden project had begun as a purely practical solution after she noticed water damage to her foundation, the kind of issue she'd once been quick to cite others for. But as she researched solutions, she'd become genuinely interested in sustainable landscaping. Mrs. Chen, it turned out, had been a landscape architect before retirement and had offered valuable advice. The weekend community workdays that Karen had once viewed as chaotic and inefficient had become a highlight of her month. There was something oddly satisfying about physical labor alongside neighbors, watching tangible improvements take shape through collective effort rather than coerced compliance. Not that Karen had transformed into a rule-breaking rebel. She still believed in standards and procedures. She just no longer saw them as weapons to wield, but as frameworks that could be flexible enough to support a thriving community. As she rounded the corner to her street, Karen spotted a group of children setting up what appeared to be a lemonade stand at the end of her driveway. Her property, without permission. Old instincts flared instantly. Bylaw violations, liability issues, noise concerns. The litany of objections formed automatically in her mind. She quickened her pace, prepared to assert her rights. Then she recognized the children, the Williams kids, whose previous attempt at a stand she'd shut down 2 years ago. The memory of Mr. Henderson's words returned. "I'd rather lose 5% property value and live in a neighborhood where kids can have lemonade stands for a good cause." By noon, the video of Karen floundering in Richard's tactical mud pit had been shared in the neighborhood's private chat group. By dinner, someone had set it to the tune of "Another One Bites the Dust" and added cartoon sound effects. The carefully cultivated fear that had been Karen's most effective enforcement tool was dissolving faster than sugar in hot coffee. In the emergency HOA board meeting she'd called, still sporting flecks of dried mud in her hair despite an hour-long shower, Karen found herself facing an unexpectedly rebellious audience. Janice from the gardening committee, usually Karen's reliable sycophant, actually raised an objection. "I've reviewed the bylaws, and Richard is right. The gate installation was completely within guidelines," Janice said, avoiding Karen's glare, "and the concrete barriers were placed without board approval or proper notice." "I am the board," Karen snapped, then immediately regretted her Emperor Palpatine moment when she saw several members exchange glances. Tom Harrigan, a retired lawyer who'd previously kept quiet during Karen's reign, cleared his throat. "Actually, Karen, that's not how a board works. We should vote on whether those barriers stay and whether Richard's violation should be rescinded." The vote wasn't even close. Karen found herself overruled 6-1, her protests falling on increasingly unsympathetic ears. Walking home after the humiliating defeat, Karen noticed details she'd been too busy to see before. How neighbors quickened their pace when they spotted her, how conversations hushed as she approached. Was this how people had always reacted to her? A flicker of discomfort passed through her, but she quickly squashed it. They simply didn't understand what was at stake. Without her vigilance, Pennycrest estates would descend into chaos and declining property values. That night, reviewing her extensive violation documentation files, Karen formulated her counterattack. Richard might have won this battle, but there were other ways to maintain control. His landscaping wasn't perfectly even across the front border. His mailbox was a shade of black that possibly differed from the approved color chart. And she'd noticed his trash cans sometimes remained at the curb for 15 minutes beyond the permitted timeframe. The next morning, Karen rose early, armed with her camera and measuring tape. The neighborhood was quiet as she methodically documented minor infractions at Richard's home and several properties belonging to board members who had betrayed her. As she was photographing Janice's slightly overgrown rose bushes, she heard a voice behind her. "Morning, Karen. Beautiful day, isn't it?" She turned to find Mrs. Chen, the 80-year-old widow whose fence Karen had forced her to repaint 3 times last summer to match the exact approved shade. "Just doing my job," Karen replied stiffly. Mrs. Chen's smile was gentle, but her eyes were shrewd. "You know, I've lived in many neighborhoods over my long life. The happiest ones were never the most perfect ones. They were the ones where people looked out for each other instead of looking for faults." "Rules exist for a reason," Karen replied automatically. "Yes, but so does kindness," Mrs. Chen said, then continued her morning walk, leaving Karen with an uncomfortable feeling that would persist throughout the day. That afternoon, Karen received an email from the board. They were calling for a special election for HOA president. The unthinkable was happening. They were challenging her leadership directly.